welcome back. This is the second in our series of Bright Futures telecasts. And today what we'd like to talk about is we would like to talk about curriculum. And as my guests, I have Mary Callan, who is a former principal at Maranacook Middle School, I understand.
That's right.
And Jill Spencer, who was a teacher at Mount Ararat Middle School and is now currently an independent consultant working around the state of Maine and the U.S. So I'd like to start with a question for each of you, and it's related to curriculum and what Bright Futures has to say about that. Bright Futures describes an effective middle-level curriculum as a curriculum that is relevant, challenging, integrative, and exploratory. So what I'm interested in knowing, Mary, is out of those, which would you say, understanding that they're all important, which one would you say really kind of sticks out in your mind as being a key characteristic?
Well, I think for me it would probably be, definitely would be all about relevancy. When kids of this age are learning, it's really important that they can find connections to whatever the topic is. The days of, when am I ever going to use this? I mean, we've all heard those questions. When am I ever going to use this? This is useless. Kids really need to be able to connect to it and have a voice in what they're learning. And what I've seen from my own experiences is when you ask kids what is really important about the world that's going on around you, using Jim Bean's process. He's a famous educator, the middle-level educator that really created a great process for kids to investigate curriculum topics in depth. What are the questions that you have about the world, and what are the questions you have about yourself? And they don't ask unimportant questions. They really do have some meaningful ideas and topics that they want to explore, and if we allow them to do that, then they're able to make connections to the content at the level at which they can access it. Mm-hmm. So to me, I think it's all about relevancy. Great. To them, not just
right.
To me. To
right.
them.
Making those connections.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Jill, how about you? Which of those characteristics would you say would be that jumps out for you?
Well, for me, it's the last part of the core practice number 1, which is that all students have equal access to this type of curriculum. In my 30-plus years of teaching, I taught both when we had heterogeneous grouping and when we had homogeneous grouping. And it's a different experience when we start to group kids. And I think we group on some very false standards. Too often a kid has some problems reading, and so we assume that they're not too bright. And so they go down into the lower, supposedly lower or different track or different grouping, and they're doing skill and drill all the time, and they are never exploring challenging ideas, big ideas of the world. They're never getting to do those things that are relevant. Yet I found that those kids were just as bright and in many ways articulate. They maybe couldn't read and write as well, or maybe their behavior problems.
Right.
But they were being denied the possibility of expanding their intellectual capacity. And I just think that that is malpractice.
Right.
So, as you're both talking about these two key aspects of middle-level curriculum, a thought that comes to mind for me is they both seem to touch on this idea of engagement. Mm-hmm. And so, Mary, I'm going to ask you something about engagement. How does relevancy really help to connect to engagement in a really kind of in a rigorous way, so that it's not just about, we talked about, this kind of relevancy is kind of this soft, well, yes, it's interesting to the kids.
Right.
And how do you move beyond, well, it's relevant, to this really matters?
Right. Well, first of all, I really do believe, again, that kids' questions are meaningful in the biggest sense of the way, biggest sense. So you take a broad topic, let's say many kids will choose a topic about conflict, for example, that they're really interested in knowing more about what's going on in the world around that. My responsibility as the teacher is then to use whatever set of standards in my district, in my school, whatever set of standards that are appropriate for that grade level, to connect to those questions so that there aren't gaps, that my responsibility is to make sure that the learning is at the level that is required for that cluster of grades, or however kids are configured. And that's another whole series. But so I think it's the combination of the kind of questions that we're asking kids to explore, they're asking themselves to explore, and the rigor, if you will, that as a teacher I'm going to make sure is appropriate for the level. This kind of goes back to what Jill was saying, appropriate for the level that that student is at, so that they have access to the content and that the other barriers aren't creating ways that they cannot access that content.
Great. So that access creates that relevancy.
Yes, I think so. I know they're very connected.
Yeah.
They're not separate.
Yeah. Jill, you used a very strong term. You brought up the term malpractice. Mm-hmm. And so I'd like you to expand a little bit on that. In what ways, have you seen teachers using malpractice?
Well, I guess I'd rather talk, Chris, about how to avoid it. Mm-hmm. Is that all right?
Yes.
Because I think of, especially in the state of Maine, where every teacher and every 7th and 8th grade student has access to a wonderful teaching tool, instructional tool called the MLT laptop. For example, all the rich resources on the internet, they are at different levels. So I can have kids reading similar text at different reading levels. But even better than that are the ability to listen to digital text through earphones, the text-to-speech or speech-to-text. Digital Dragon Dictation, that wonderful little free app that can go on a phone, and a kiddo can push record and record ideas, then email those ideas to themselves and open a Word document, and then have some ideas that they couldn't get from here to either the keyboard or to handwriting. There is so much great stuff on video that explains important concepts that they have to say. So there are multiple ways to access it. The whole universal access concept through the CAST website, C-A-S-T. There's just no reason why students can't access rich, relevant, challenging, tough curriculum in multiple ways. And so I think we can avoid the malpractice by saying, well, Chris, you don't read so well, so you can't possibly be in this class where we're going to read some of the great classics for young adolescents because you can't read it. You can listen to it via your computer with headphones. Or, Mary, because you have some organizational issues and you don't write too well, you can't be in this creative writing class. I'm sorry, you need to go practice the 5-paragraph essay 14 more times. Whereas there is plenty of software and free apps out there that kids can use and teachers can use to have these wonderful curriculum, very challenging base curriculum units.
Well, this is great. Thank you very much. This is all the time we have for this session, but we'll have many others. So just as a reminder, this was about curriculum and the characteristics of a good middle school curriculum as defined in Bright Futures. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.